Hello, my ghouls and goblins. Welcome back. Today we are discussing The Picture of Dorian Gray, written by Oscar Wilde, and we're comparing it to the '09 film adaptation, the one with Ben Barnes, the one you've pinned to all of your Dark Academia Pinterest boards. That one, that's the one we're talking about. Even if you haven't read The Picture of Dorian Gray before, Um, you've certainly heard about it. It's synonymous when talking about man's vanity and comparable to many other artistic expressions about the topic of vanity. It's comparable to the painting Narcissus. Um, the actual main character, Dorian Gray, does get compared a lot to him, and that is, of course, purposeful. If I'm looking over here, I'm looking at my notes. I don't have a photographic memory, but we're here, right? Now, before I proceed, I want to say Oscar Wilde was a monstrous man in his life. You don't have to read his work. I did because I was curious. This book is considered in the literary world the godfather of the dark academic genre, and it's the reason why I read it, because I was curious. And I saw the '09 film adaptation when I was younger that I loved, and I rewatched for this video. The story is about a young man who gets his portrait painted, and in a moment of fear of losing his youth and beauty, which all seem very ephemeral to him in this moment, he makes an unconscious and unspoken agreement with the painting that he will go on living like the young, beautiful man that he is, and the portrait will age in turn, expressing and showing the state of his soul. This video is from my perspective. I purposefully did not look up Oscar Wilde's intentions with these characters. And the same goes for the film. I didn't look up the actors or the director's intentions. I simply wanted to go about this video giving you just what I read versus what I saw when watching the movie. And I hope you're along for the ride. If you have read the book, seen the film, or even if you're just along for the gag, in my comments, let's go at it. Let's talk about this like we're in, a literature class. And I am your unqualified professor. Speaking of qualifications, I do want to say I am a writer and therefore a reader. I am a published poet, and I mainly write in poetry and fiction. And right now, I am working on my first novel, which is the reason why I've read so much, because great advice from my professors when I was in my undergrad is that you should read a lot. I have my bachelor's degree in creative writing, and more than anything, despite me having some credentials, my perspective is limited. I purposefully limited that perspective, but also this isn't my POV. You have a different point of view from me, which is why I want to hear your interpretations in the comments, what you thought compared to what I think. And I think it'll be, as long as we keep it respectful, we can have a key in the comments about this. So let's get into it. Baby girl, you are so pretty, pretty, pretty. Dorian Gray oftentimes reminded me of a male version of Jennifer Check, which Jennifer being a woman is cunt, but a man being Jennifer Check is scurry. He's young, selfish, rich, impatient, rude. He's beautiful. He's unempathetic, and people can't get enough of him. He gets the attention and friendship of many people, but especially the artists Basil Howard and Lord Henry. They're drawn to him because of how innocent and young and stunning he is. You will not hardly read any page where Dorian's appearance isn't mentioned, and it's not to tire you of it, but it's just Dorian's reality, and it shows how many doors open for him just because he's beautiful and also rich. Dorian is compared to a literal cherub in the book, and that is because people in society view this golden haired, blue eyed boy He is the picture of what white British society considers innocent. The typical leading character being blonde hair, blue eyed is something we've seen in film and literature a lot. I do believe Oscar Wilde does this intentionally to show how the society he lives in, this Western European white society, views him and how they consider him to be the picture of innocence. In the book, Dorian Gray's mother passed away after her husband was yeeted off the planet by her father, who is a lord. And he did this because he wasn't messing with his daughter, messing with some lowbrow, untitled man with no money into his name. He wasn't messing with it. So Dorian is an orphan, but he is rich and he is the head of his estate now. In the movies, however, Dorian's backstory isn't tragic enough, and so they have it like his father abuses him. Don't know what that's about. Well, actually, I do know what that's about. The movie oftentimes takes aspects of the book and over dramatizes them for that good old movie magic. And Dorian's backstory is nonetheless, it's not sad enough that his mother has passed away and, lost her husband because her father is crazy, crazy elitist. As we go along with comparing the book and the '09 adaptation, because there are many adaptations, but we're focusing on the 2009 one, the movie tends to really force Dorian to be what I consider or a sympathetic victim. And I'm like, there are aspects of Dorian that we can understand him with, but Dorian is the story's villain. And I feel like the movie oftentimes tries to push that onto other characters. It shows a much more dramatic fall from grace. Dorian in the movies is a novice almost to this world. He's re entering, or at least how it seems with the movie, he's re entering, he's moved back home. He's almost adjusting to his life, you know, as an elite in society, and which is why he's introduced to so many people and he's almost like a new face. And he's similarly a new face in the books as well, because not a lot of people know about him right off the bat or about his origin story, which I'm sure the grandfather did purposefully. But the movie really does shift, I feel like, the blame, and really all characters involved are enablers of Dorian's behavior, but Dorian is the cause of his choices, right? Lord Henry, our hedonist philosopher, he is a lord and a rich white man in the upper class societies of Britain. And he is someone who instantly intrigues Dorian because of the way he thinks. Lord Henry is outrageous and his philosophies are honestly backwards. Even the people in his society, or even the people in his class, think some of the things he says are crazy, but he is entertaining. And he was a perspective that I found deeply integral to the story because he is very conscious of how he views Dorian society and his consciousness of that, and how straightforward he says things reflects the thoughts and feelings of the people around Dorian. We're going to talk a lot about class. Lord Henry is not the only character that deposits his philosophies onto Dorian. His philosophies are simply the ones that intrigue Dorian the most. On page 27, Dorian thinks to himself, why had it been left to a stranger to reveal him to himself? He had known Basil Howard, the artist, for months, but his friendship between them had never altered him. And this becomes a latching point for Dorian and Henry. He latches onto him because he feels that spark. And Henry is lighting that fire. Lord Henry also, this is something he's very conscious of doing to Dorian, is igniting that spark of wanting to experience life and know more, especially centering your life around pleasure. I love working with faulty lighting. Anyway, so Lord Henry is conscious that he wants to ignite this spark in Dorian because he recalls when it was lit in him. And because of this, he deposits every hedonist thought he's ever had, and he does it in a way that it's very forward. The things he says to Dorian. There are certain times where he's talking to Dorian and he's like, you agree with me. There are parts of you that you've hidden from yourself. You know more and less than you think you do. In the movies, Lord Henry is the op. He is he functions in the movie's perspective almost like a Dr. Frankenstein, and Dorian is the monster he created, and he can't handle or stand the monster he created. Mary Shelley would be pissed. Lord Henry is manipulative of Dorian. He's a walking definition of peer pressure in an older man's body. He also looks jittery at times, which I find really weird. Jittery and just like he's permeating in hateration. He's representative of like this sort of caricature devil sitting on his shoulder. And the way Oscar Wilde does this is more masterful. In the movies, they often parallel Basil, the artist, and Lord Henry because the books also parallel them. In the books, Basil and Harry are, while they do function as opposites in ideology, they're both enablers and guilty of projecting innocence onto Dorian to the point where even when he does wrong, it's not believed. Dorian could literally and has literally confessed to murder or posed it in a question, and they didn't believe him. So there's that. Well, specifically, Lord Henry didn't believe him. In the books, Basil's deepest desire is for Dorian to not change. He wants Dorian to stay as he immortalized him in the painting. And even when he's painting him, there's a subtle moment where Dorian is first talking to Lord Henry, and he says, he tells him to be still, and he's like, because there's an expression in you that I had never seen before. And this is the main reason why Basil doesn't want Lord Henry to meet Dorian, because he doesn't want Dorian to change. Basil is so focused on how he sees Dorian that he doesn't truly know Dorian. And it's his greatest flaw. He says on page 20, he says this to Lord Henry. He says, don't take away from me the one person who gives my art whatever charm it possesses. My life as an artist depends on him. Basil is desperate to keep Dorian uninfluenced by Harry and any opinion that he honestly doesn't agree with. But this gatekeeping of Dorian's innocence won't save him. Though it is understandable why he would, because he wants to preserve that in Dorian which he finds to be good and delightful. But the things that he finds to be good in Dorian are ephemeral things. Dorian's beauty isn't going to last forever. Dorian's perfect blonde hair and all this luster isn't going to last forever. And it's one of the main reasons why Dorian ends up making this implicit contract, because the people around him, specifically Basil and Harry, are reminding him of how, important his beauty is to them. And therefore, that places a large amount of importance to Dorian about his looks. Basil falls prey in the movie to Dorian's intense manipulation because Basil wants to use the portrait he painted of Dorian for some art exhibit. And Dorian is like, you can't see it because it's changed since, he last saw it. And so Dorian manipulates Basil into sleeping with him because he knows Basil is attracted to him. In the books, Basil is attracted to Dorian, but it's never reciprocated. Dorian never has sex with Basil. So, again, that's the movie dramatizing things. And I do believe that this dramatization of their relationship takes away depth because we can see and we're along for the journey of these characters as they grow. The movie, it falls flat and removes Basil's true feelings for Dorian. And in the book, it doesn't do that. Dorian oftentimes thinks he's in love with multiple women in the story, but as it goes on, we can see that Dorian truly is only infatuated with these women for certain attributes of themselves. He tends to go for women who are young and beautiful like himself, but often it's because something in them captivated him. And that takes us to our first girl, Miss Sybil Vane, the actress herself. She is a talent that stuns Dorian. He's so enamored with her talent that he wants to marry her and show her off to his friends. He takes Basil and Harry with him to the theater to see Sybil perform, but child, she does a terrible job. She gets a Razzie in his eyes for this performance, and Dorian is embarrassed. Okay, he ain't playing with Sybil Vane no more. And mind you, he's insinuated deep love for this, this young woman and, devotion to her and all this appreciation. And it all dissolves in a matter of one performance. Dorian fell for her talent, not Sybil Vane. And so when she is not producing the talent he fell for, he ices her out and he no longer wants anything to do with her. He calls her a commonplace, mediocre actress. And mind you, Dorian is saying this to his friends, right? After he said so many good things about Sybil, he's like, I'm in love with her. She's amazing. You have to see her. Only for him to insult her in their presence. And this is the woman he says he wants to marry.
No.
E. Choose your partners wisely, kids. He questions Sybil about why she embarrassed him in front of his friends. And Sybil basically says she's been pretending to be in love for so long that now that Dorian has entered her life, she no longer can act. She doesn't, not that she can't, she doesn't want to, because she's like, I'm really in love in real life with you. So I don't have to be Juliet or Rosalind and be in love with a man who I'm not even in love with. And if you were truly in love with someone, right, them bombing and acting performance might give you the ick. I won't lie. It might give you the ick. You might feel embarrassed in front of your friends, and they might look at you like you're just in love. Her talent ain't there. But Dorian completely tosses her aside, and he, such a drama king, he says to her, you have killed my love. You used to stir my imagination. Now you don't even stir my curiosity. So dramatic. He says, you simply produce no effect. I loved you because you were marvelous, because you had genius and intellect, because you realized the dreams of great poets and gave shape and substance to the shadows of art. It's really interesting because before this, when he's talking to Basil and Henry about coming to see her perform, he says, any man who hurts Sybil Vane is a monster. In the movie, Dorian is engaged to Sybil, and Harry and Basil never see her at the theater. The movie removes these certain key pieces of Sybil and Dorian's story and takes away all of the gravitas and makes it shallow. And it trades it for this subpar plot line of Dorian cheating on Sybil with multiple women, and he lies to her about it when she asks him why he was out so late. Lord Henry is a seething villain, so he lied with ease. But Sybil clocks Dorian and she's like, you're not as good a liar as him. And he's, you know, all types of mad. White boy rage activated. He's like, your audacity for calling me out on cheating on you. Ugh. Mind you, the painting has already been painted at this point. This is a key scene because it's part of why the painting changes his storyline with Sybil. It's the first time that the painting shifts after Sybil unalives herself. But the movie, while it does show the painting changing due to the Sybil situation, it certainly takes out scenes that show us who Dorian is. And it's showing how Dorian handles this young woman's love and affection for him and all the things he promised. And the movie takes that away, and it doesn't, it cheapens Dorian's shallowness for, oh, I cheated on you, while cheating is horrible, but it takes it away because it doesn't show us, the things that made his love for Sybil shallow. Loving her only for her talent is a shallow love when you're trying to be someone's husband. And then it trades it out for this. The movie is really focused on Dorian's sex life. In the book, he never had sex with Sybil because their romance was short lived. But the movie has it like they sleep together. And then he cheats on her with some sex workers that the villain himself, Lord Henry, introduces him to. Doesn't happen in the books. I do believe that the story, it's Oscar Wilde. He himself was a gay man, and I don't think he was shy at all about showing relationships between men that sometimes walk cross the lines of friendship to lovers or something more. He walks that line in a really interesting way, and we can see it in Dorian's connection with Lord Henry. While his feelings aren't necessarily romantic, sometimes I found Dorian's instant attraction for him and um the way he's seduced almost by Lord Henry. He often says how his voice, draws him in, it lures him along with his philosophies. And I do think it's showing a type of desire, not necessarily lust or love, but it's definitely showing something. And I do believe that is the lure of knowledge that we don't have presently. Nothing lures a human being more than doing what you were told not to do, and then also experiencing something you've never felt before. And Lord Henry knows this. Again, he's very conscious of his relationship with Dorian and the things he wants to impress upon him. On page 86, Lord Henry says directly to Dorian, "Yes, Dorian, you will always be fond of me. I represent to you all the sins you have never had the courage to commit." In the movies, the at times twitchy Lord Henry only desires to tempt Dorian. He's just there to get Dorian to further drive his life into, a bottomless pit that he can laugh and kiki at. Dorian is drawn to pleasing him and becoming exactly who he says he should. And it changes the impression Henry makes on Dorian because their relationship is one that represents almost Eve biting the apple in the Garden of Eden, which Dorian would be Eve. A Frankenstein plotline isn't bad or cheap, but it's not the story Oscar Wilde wrote, in my opinion. Tell me how you feel in the comments. It's getting dark and spooky in here, right? I think it's kind of a vibe. Let me know how you feel about it. All these characters are guilty of underplaying Dorian's reactions to events in his life and his decisions and actions in his life. They look at Dorian from the perspective of someone who is almost incapable of evil, incapable of doing wrong, and committing the gravest of sins to others. Dorian's presumed innocence shows a deep fallacy with this sort of mindset that's so focused on beauty being wholly connected to who someone is, versus it being just how they present in society and in life. If Dorian, think about this, if Dorian, a white, rich man, blonde hair and blue eyed, if he is the definition of innocent, then anyone who doesn't look like Dorian in any proximity of closeness is going to be innately considered evil and wrong and capable of evil. Dorian's beauty is not the standard, nor is his position in life, nor the people he hangs around. These issues that Oscar Wilde points out show how these mindsets, especially in the West, bleed into society. We can see examples of this with classism and also white superiority. There's a quote that says, and this is Dorian when he's traveling the world, gaining experience. And like the colonizer he is, he's encountering other cultures of people who are opposite of him. Here's how that's described. It says, he collected together from all parts of the world the strangest instruments that could be found, either in the tombs of dead nations or among the few savage tribes that have survived contact with Western civilization and loved to touch and try them. He had the mysterious jura Paris of the Rio Negro Indians. So we don't have to really point out what's, inherently racist and showing a very white superiority complex because it's there on the page blatantly. Any society that exists outside of Western society, rules, and ways of life was always considered savage back then. And clearly, that's a mindset that hasn't changed in 2025, unfortunately. I bring this quote up because while, yes, I can hear the argument that this was just the way people thought back then, imagine anyone calling Dorian himself savage. They would never, because of who he is and what he represents. Dorian commits literal murder, by the way. And oftentimes, like I said earlier in the video, he tells people or he poses it as a question, and it's completely unbelieved. Descriptions, there are other descriptions that are inherently racist in the books, like grinning Negro, barbaric, civilized society, all point to the innate white superiority complex that exists in Dorian and British society. The movie does show what I would call typical stereotypes of certain characters, like they're the sex workers who Dorian cheats on Sybil Vane with. Two of them are women of color, one black and one Asian woman. And while there are other sex workers in the story, we don't see any other representation of people of color in the story. And while in Oscar Wilde's book we don't see that, we see them in the places that Dorian travels, the movie having them show up as sex workers feels typical and all racist. It's not making a point or giving us any commentary or insight to infer outside of the context that they give us. And because of that, the book is inherently racist, right? Especially in scenes talking about other cultures and people of color. And that feels inherent to the characters in the story. Not saying that Oscar Wilde is somehow just above all of these things. I'm sure a lot of the things that he put in this story are things he lived and saw himself and maybe even thought himself. But the movie doesn't give us that depth of insight into classism, into, Eurocentric, perspectives on things. They just give us that. And along with talking about classism, if you haven't heard enough about it, there's this wonderful quote that describes what I'm talking about on pages 221 to 222. Dorian asks Lord Henry, "What would you say, Harry, If I told you that I murdered Basil, you know, the artist, our friend, that one. And Lord Henry is like, honey, he says, I would say, my dear fellow, that you were posing a character that doesn't suit you. All crime is vulgar, just as all vulgarity is crime. Crime belongs exclusively to the lower orders. I don't blame them in the smallest degree. I would fancy that crime was to them what art is to us. Simply a method of procuring extraordinary sensations. Yeah. So there's that. And again, it's on the page. It's telling us exactly how Lord Henry sees people in his station, of his station, and beneath his station. Rich folk incapable of murder, even though Dorian Gray's grandfather has his father killed. But rich folks is incapable of murder? Crazy work. And there's also this, saying that lower orders or people who aren't rich, crime is to them what art is to them, also makes art, which is something that a lot of people have said even to today, feel wholly exclusive and hard to truly delve into, because art is so connected to money and privilege and the wealth to have it. In order to experience art, you have to have the means to experience it, which, isn't true. The greatest of artists have been poor. And also, to be poor doesn't mean that crime is your version of art. It's something you experience senses with. No one suffering from poverty wants to act out crime to get a rush or a thrill. In the movie, it completely removes that, as the movie does. It over dramatizes sex and relationships, and it undermines all of the layered storytelling that Oscar Wilde puts in here. Um, they do this by giving us an ending focused on Lord Henry being upset that Dorian is marrying his only daughter. Again, Dorian is the monster he created, and he's not happy when his monster does the evil he told him to do to him. This doesn't happen in the books, but, movie magic. Only thing that is really showing us this sort of this classist perspective on is the murder of Sybil Vane's brother. In the book, Sybil Vane unalives herself, and her brother, who is a sailor, is deeply wrought about his sister's passing, because it's something he didn't expect. He's like out for blood to find the man who caused his sister's passing. He hears someone calls Dorian's name, and he corners him in an alley, and he basically confronts him and is like, "You're Dorian Gray, you knew my sister, I'm gonna kill you." And he holds a gun up at him, by the way. And then Dorian very cunningly is like, "I don't know your sister. How long ago was her murder?" James Vane, the brother, is like, "It was 18 years ago." And Dorian's like, "Hold my face up to the light." I can hear my friend Rich laughing at my British accents. But he's like, "Hold me up to the light." And then he holds him up to the light. And, James is horrified because he's like, "I have the wrong man." Dorian is a boy, and that was 18 years ago. The person who did that should be older by now. He should show signs that he's aged and he's no longer a boy. He should be a man. And so Dorian is able to escape, but, James comes back later on. In the movie, they have it like James comes to Dorian's estate with his sister's clothing, and he confronts him, just like the book, right? Well, not just like the book, because James doesn't come to his estate. But he goes to his estate with his sister's clothing, which has blood on it, and he says, "You not only lost my sister, you lost your child." And that right there is further dramatization of Sybil's plot. He strangles Dorian. James strangles Dorian in the movie in a fit of rage. And instantly, Lord Henry, along with some ward from a mental hospital, pull him off Dorian. And the ward says, we can't have maniacs threatening decent people in their home. And you can see this as the movie's failed attempts to show what rich people can do to the James Vanes of the world. But it feels lazy because throwing James in a mental hospital cuts his story and vengeance shorter. James spans throughout the book, his story, much like Sybil's does. It's the first of Dorian's sins that we can see in the book, and it shows how that one decision haunts him. And in the books, James is shot when he's out looking for Dorian, and Dorian is hanging with some new rich friends he's introduced to. In the end, asks us to see the body because he doesn't know it's James Vane, but he's told by someone, I believe his butler, that the guy who was shot was a sailor, and he sees the body, and Dorian doesn't feel an ounce of sadness. Dorian is thrilled. He is happy. And yes, anyone will be happy to not have the woman who you did dirty's brother out to kill you, but there's not an ounce of remorse in Dorian or empathy for the fact that while yes, I'm no longer going to be shot by James, but James also had a reason to have the vengeance in his heart that he did. And now we are at the end, my fellow ghouls and goblins. While Dorian is responsible for his life and the decisions he makes, like any of us are, you are influenced by your surroundings. When I say Dorian is the villain of his story, it's because it is Dorian's story and it is his own life he is ruining. And he doesn't heed the good advice that he's given. And we can also see that Dorian, while yes, his perspective is limited to his surroundings, he also isn't drawn to people that don't, encourage the things that he likes. Lord Henry's perspective condones Dorian's own lust for life and the things he lusts for. But he is responsible for murdering people. We can say that. Though maybe that runs in the family because his granddaddy murdered his daddy. And it makes us question, I suppose, how much are we in charge of? It's nature versus nurture. There are parts of our lives that we were nurtured into, acting and being. And then there are things that are a part of our nature. And I do think a part of Dorian's nature is, impatient, is somebody who has a want to learn, but it doesn't have it's not pointed in the right directions. Dorian would rather feel sensations and, collect items around the world, but he doesn't want to have deep understanding of the people who created those items that he so happily possesses, like the colonizer he is. So something I want you to remember: while Dorian is a character, he is also an archetype, a Narcissus, a beautiful man seduced by his own beauty and whose vanity is his folly. That is all for today, my ghouls and goblins. Please tell me down below how you feel about this video. Any classics or other books that you're interested in me reading or wanting me to do a comparative analysis on to the film, let me know. That is all for now.